everyone, and welcome back to Uncivil Law, where we break down the wildest, most intriguing legal cases out there. Today's case is one that's impacted one of the most beloved music legends of all time. We're talking about a daring attempt to steal Graceland, the legendary home of Elvis Presley, and a scheme so thorough, audacious, and elaborate, it could be the plot of a Hollywood thriller. The person at the center of this story? A woman named Lisa Jeanine Findley, who's been charged with trying to defraud the Presley family out of millions of dollars and ownership of one of the most iconic properties in America. Now you might be thinking, how does someone even begin to pull something like this off? Well, Findley allegedly went all out, fabricating a web of lies that included fake loan documents, forged signatures, and even a completely fictitious lender named Nalseni Investments. But it doesn't stop there. She used multiple aliases, posed as different people, and even filed false claims in court to make her scheme look legitimate. It's a level of deception that's almost hard to believe. But somehow it gets even worse. Findley's plan involved real-world actions like publishing fake foreclosure notices in newspapers and threatening to auction off Graceland itself if the Presley's family didn't pay up. And when the whole thing started to fall apart, she didn't back down, she doubled down. In a desperate twist, she tried to shift the blame onto an alleged Nigerian identity theft, making the story even more bizarre and complex. So in today's video, we're going to unpack all this. We'll look at how the law caught up with Findley, the legal charges she's facing, and why this case is a textbook example of how not to commit fraud. From the forged documents to the failed attempts at covering her tracks, this case has it all. Stick around because you're not going to want to miss the details of how. All right, let's start out with the basics. Who is Lisa Jeanine Findley? Well, she's a 53-year-old woman from Missouri, and she's been charged with several serious crimes, including mail fraud, aggravated identity theft, and more. According to the allegations, she concocted a plan to convince the Presley family and the courts that Lisa Marie Presley, Elvis's daughter, had pledged Graceland as collateral for a $3.8 million loan back in 2018. The problem? That loan, and the lender she claimed provided it, didn't exist. To pull off the scheme, Findley allegedly used a slew of fake documents, forged signatures, and multiple aliases, including some rather imaginative names like Gregory Nasani and Carolyn Williams. She even went so far as to file these fake documents with public officials and publish foreclosure notices in the Memphis newspaper, all to create the illusion that Graceland was about to be auctioned off to the highest bidder. The Presley family, understandably, wasn't going to take this lying down. They fought back, filed lawsuits to stop the sale, and ultimately exposed the entire scheme as a fraud. And that, my friend, is where the real legal fun begins. Let's start by talking about one of the main charges now facing this woman, mail fraud. Now, mail fraud is a federal offense under 18 U.S.C. 1341, and it's one of those crimes that can be surprisingly broad. Essentially, if you use the mail in any way to further your fraudulent scheme, you could be looking at mail fraud charges. In this case, Findley allegedly used the U.S. Postal Service to send out all sorts of fraudulent documents, everything from creditors' claims to foreclosure notices, all designed to make it look like the Presley family was about to lose Graceland because of some unpaid debt. The law takes a very dim view to this kind of behavior, and for good reason. The postal system is supposed to be trustworthy, and using it to commit fraud undermines that trust. For mail fraud, the prosecution will need to prove a few key elements: that there was a scheme to defraud, that the defendant used the mail to further the scheme, and the defendant had the intent to defraud. In Findley's case, all these elements appear to be very easy to meet. She clearly had a plan to defraud the Presley family, she used the mail to send out fake documents, and given the elaborate nature of her scheme, it's pretty clear she had the intent to deceive. If convicted, Findley could be looking at some serious prison time, up to 20 years per count of mail fraud to be exact. And that's just for the mail fraud. But of course, we're just getting started. Next up, we have a charge of aggravated identity theft under 18 U.S.C. 1028A. Now, identity theft is bad enough on its own, but when it's linked to other serious crimes, say, for example, mail fraud, the penalties can get even worse. Aggravated identity theft occurs when someone knowingly uses, without lawful authority, someone's identity in connection with certain felony violations like mail fraud. In this case, Findley didn't just steal one person's identity, she allegedly created multiple identities out of thin air. She used these fake documents and fake identities to sign documents, send emails, and basically build an entire fake narrative around a non-existent loan. One of the key pieces of evidence here is that she forged the signature of Lisa Marie Presley on a promissory note and a deed of trust. These documents were central to Findley's scheme, as they were supposed to prove Presley had taken out this massive loan and pledged Graceland as collateral. But the signatures were fake, The documents were fake, and that's where the identity theft comes in. If Findley is convicted of aggravated identity theft, she's looking at a mandatory minimum of 2 years in prison for each count, and that's on top of whatever she could get for the mail fraud and other charges. The law takes this kind of thing very seriously, and for good reason. Using someone else's identity to commit fraud is not just a crime against the individual, it's a crime against the entire legal system. Next up in our legal panoply, let's talk about forgery and the use of false documents, because this really is the backbone of Findley's entire scheme. Forgery, in the legal sense, involves making, altering, or using a written document with the intent to defraud. And boy, oh boy, did Findley allegedly engage in some serious forgery. According to the criminal complaint, Findley forged all sorts of documents, everything from the promissory note to the deed of trust. She even went so far apparently as to forge the signature of a notary public, which is a big no-no in the legal world. These documents were then used to file false claims in court and record fake deeds with the Shelby County Register's office, all in an attempt to create the illusion that Graceland was up for grabs. The use of false documents is another serious offense, especially when those documents are filed with public offices. Public records are supposed to be accurate and trustworthy, and using those documents to alter those records is a serious breach of trust. It's also worth noting these actions could lead to additional charges, such as perjury, if Findley knowingly filed false documents under oath. If convicted of these charges, Findley could face additional serious penalties on top of whatever else she's facing from the mail fraud and identity theft. The law on this is very clear. Forging documents and then using them to commit fraud is a serious crime, and one that the courts will not take lightly. Now let's move on to another interesting legal charge that's present in this case, attempted extortion. Extortion involves obtaining money, property, or something of value through coercion, threats, or force. In this case, the coercion came in the form of the legal documents that threatened the Presleys and Graceland unless the family coughed up $2.85 million. Here's the thing about extortion. It doesn't matter whether the threat was actually carried out. The mere act of making the threat with the intent to extort is enough to land you in serious legal trouble. And in the Findley case, the threat was very real, or at least it appeared to be at the start. She went through all the motions of filing the foreclosure notices, sending letters to the Presley family, and even setting a date for the auction of Graceland. The law sees this kind of behavior as an abuse of power. You can't just threaten to take someone else's property unless they pay you off, especially when your entire claim to that property is based on lies and forged documents. If Findley is found guilty of the attempted extortion, it's another serious charge that adds to the list of her growing legal problems. But wait, folks, there's still more, because we need to talk about fraudulent misrepresentation, which is essentially lying to someone to get them to act to their detriment. It's a key element in many fraud cases, and it's certainly in play here. In this case, Findley allegedly made numerous false statements to the Presley family, their attorneys, and even to the courts. She claimed that Lisa Marie Presley had taken out a loan, that Graceland was the collateral, and the loan was default, all of which were lies. These misrepresentations were designed to deceive the Presley family into believing they owed money to Nassau Investments, a company that, as far as we can tell, didn't ever actually exist. Fraudulent misrepresentation is a big deal in the legal world because it undermines the trust and honesty that's supposed to be at the core of business and legal transactions. If you can't trust the person you're dealing with, then the whole system starts to fall apart. That's why the law comes down on this kind of behavior. In Findley's case, these misrepresentations were central to her scheme to defraud. She needed all these people to believe that Graceland was at risk so they would either pay up or panic, allowing her to swoop in and rescue the property through a fraudulent foreclosure. One aspect of this case that really stands out is the way Findley allegedly used public institutions to further her scheme. We're talking about the courts, the Shelby County Register's office, and even the local newspaper in Memphis. By filing these false documents and publishing fake notices, Findley tried to create an air of legitimacy around her fraudulent claims. This is where things start to get interesting from a legal perspective. Public institutions like this are supposed to be pillars of truth. They exist to protect the people's rights, not to be used as a fraudulent scheme. By manipulating these institutions, Findley wasn't just committing fraud against the Presley family, she was undermining the integrity of the entire legal system. This is one of those reasons why our actions are so serious. It's not just about the money, it's about the trust that we place in our legal and public institutions. When someone uses one of these institutions to commit fraud, it erodes that trust and makes it harder for the system to function. So there you have it, folks. The case against Lisa Jeanine Findley is a wild ride through the world of legal fraud, identity theft, forgery, and more. It's a stark reminder that no matter how elaborate your scheme may be, the law eventually has a way of catching up with you. But before I wrap it up, I've got a few questions for you all. First, what do you think was going through Findley's mind when she decided to try to pull off a scheme this ridiculous? Second, how long do you think it took her to realize that blaming a random Nigerian identity theft was not going to be a magical fix to everything? And finally, do you ever think she imagined she'd face decades in prison for her genius plan? I'd love to hear your thoughts, so drop your answer in the comment section below. Until next time, I've been Uncivil Law, and remember, keep it uncivil out there.